For the first half of February, we have some stunning sales outcomes when we look at Yotobashi's top 10. Did Canon get shut out of the top 10 for the very first time? Did the Sony A9 Mark III break all sales figures? And what about the little guy? Did Hasselblad, Panasonic, or OM Systems make it into the top 10? But before we get to the details, please subscribe to this channel. It doesn't cost you anything, helps this channel grow, and keeps you up to date on the latest camera coverage. Yodobashi publishes their top 10 sales figures every 2 weeks, just like clockwork. Yodobashi is the 4th largest Japanese camera store, but it's just a single data point. It's not enough to reflect what's happening in Europe or even North America. As we saw with Canon's latest financial results, Canon is doing well with 48% market share. So why do we cover Yodobashi? Well, because it gives us a glimpse into how well Canon is doing in a larger Japanese camera store. And, most importantly, it gives us something to talk about on a slow Sunday morning. So in first and second place, we have the Sony a7C and the Sony a7C kit. Are we really surprised to see Sony with a top 2 positions? It really shouldn't be, because Sony has been dominating the Yodobashi top 10 for the better part of 6 months, actually going on 9 months now. But in third place, we have something other than a Sony. We have the recently announced retro-style, cool-looking Nikon ZF as it takes third place. But Sony takes fourth place with the a7 IV kit, before we see Nikon returning to fifth place with the Nikon Z8. And I just love the Nikon Z8. I think it's one of the best cameras on the marketplace. Well, at least for what I do, I'd say it is the best camera on the market. I do love the Canon EOS R5. I still think it's one of the best cameras out there to be able to do what it does, as well as it does, since July of 2020. It's really an impressive camera, but we've got to be fair and say, look at the Nikon Z8. Instead of 8K RAW, it does 8K RAW up to 60 frames per second, not 50 frames per second. It has Apple ProRes as a codec. It's able to do a few more things than the Canon EOS R5 can, which really isn't a surprise. After all, they had a few years on the R5 to make a better camera. So who shows up in sixth place? Well, don't be surprised. Sony once again shows up in fifth place, but this time with a Sony a7R5, a camera that was announced back in November 2022 that's performed quite well since. And now in seventh place, we have a little bit of shock and awe going on. Well, a little bit less shock and a little bit more, oh, that's awesome. He's made it. And we don't have a Canon, we don't have a Nikon, and we definitely don't have a Sony. Guess who shows up? Yep, it's actually a Fujifilm X-T5, a very good and solid APS-C camera, a good camera for photographers that does well in terms of video capabilities. But who shows up next? Who shows up in eighth place? Is it finally a Canon? Or could it be Sony again with another camera, or maybe Nikon with their third camera? Well, it is a Nikon. It's the Nikon ZFC, another one of their cool-looking retro-styled cameras, showing that while they don't have a monopoly on cool-looking retro-style cameras, they do have a monopoly on the cool-looking retro-style cameras that sell. But I want to return to that statement of shock and awe. Now, one thing that's starting to shape up as a bit of a shock is that so far on this list over here, we don't have any Canon cameras. None. Not the R5, which is on sale some, well, $900, $1,100 or $1,000 off the initial release price of the R5. It's selling for $29.99, and at Adorama they'll even throw in a 128 gigabyte CF Express Type B card and a card reader. It's $29.99 throughout the United States, B&H, Adorama, or Amazon.com. It's a shockingly low price. The Canon EOS R5C is some $1,300 off at $35.99. I was so surprised by these numbers that I put out a video on this yesterday. But they're not showing up in the top 10. It's not enough to get people so excited enough to buy these cameras. Well, keep in mind, that's right, this is the Japanese market, and the Japanese yen has lost something like, well, 25 to 30% against the US dollar. So while these might seem very affordable in terms of US dollars, they're not affordable when it comes to Japan. And so that's why when you see all these sales figures, all these sales, and you're not seeing it translate into this, remember, we're not seeing these same clearance style sales in Japan. So it doesn't mean to say that the R5 isn't moving very well at Adorama and B&H. It most likely is. It just means that outside of the United States, we're dealing with things such as currency exchanges. And that's why in Europe, in the United Kingdom, in Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, as our currencies have lost against the US dollar, well, so has that discount on the R5 dropped relative to the US dollar. So taking a look at ninth place, we can see once again we have another Sony, the Sony a7 IV body alone. And when it comes to Yodobashi, they do report different SKUs, not necessarily different camera models. So the a7 IV and the a7 IV kit are two separate boxes, two separate SKUs. And that's why we report like the first and second place. We have the a7C II, body alone, and the a7C kit because, well, they are two separate SKUs. I know it's annoying. It's not so much the top 10 in this case, it's more like the top 8. And now for the biggest shock and awe of all. Can you guess who shows up in 10th place? I know you must be thinking it's got to be a Canon, right? Well, I can tell you this. It's not a Nikon, and it's not a Sony. It's not a Panasonic, and it's not a Fuji. Can you guess which camera it's going to be now? The Canon EOS R6 Mark II. That's what I'm hearing, right? And that's completely wrong. You're not going to believe this. It's actually the Hasselblad 907X and the CFV 100C. Pretty shocking, right? That's why I chose the thumbnail that I did, is when we take a look at all the cameras in the Yodobashi top 10 for the first 2 weeks of February, we don't see a single Canon in the list. And Sony dominates once again with about 4 cameras, and we see Nikon with a very good showing with 3 cameras. The Nikon Z8, that makes sense. The Nikon ZF and the ZF-C, that also makes sense. And the Sony cameras, the a7C II, the a7 IV, the a7 R5. But what's really surprising is that all this talk about the global shutter in the A9 Mark III, it's not showing up in the list. And yes, it was on sale for the first 2 weeks of February globally. It's surprising that we don't see the Sony A9 Mark III in the top 10. That's really surprising. Now, to see the Hasselblad show up, I haven't seen Hasselblad show up in the top 10. In fact, I don't recall ever seeing Hasselblad show up in the top 10 with any camera model. And to see Canon completely shut out of the Yodobashi top 10, I've never seen that. I've never seen that at all. Normally, Canon has anywhere from 3 to 5 cameras in the Yodobashi top 10. And if we go back past 9 months, what we often saw is 1 week Sony would dominate. The next week Canon would dominate. They'd go back and forth between 3 to 5 cameras each. Sometimes Canon dominating the top 3 or the top 5. Sometimes Sony wrestling the top 3 or the top 5 away. This is shocking. This is surprising. But keep in mind, the data doesn't lie. This is coming from the 4th largest Japanese camera retailer. So it does give us a snapshot of Japan. But what it really gives us, and this is really important to focus on here, it gives us a focus on a country where the exchange rate has dropped relative to the US dollar some 30% since 2020. And that definitely has an impact. It has an impact on pricing. It makes the higher end cameras far more, well, unaffordable. Whereas in the United States, where we've seen a very, very strong dollar, Canon's able to release cameras such as the R6 Mark II for the same price as the Mark I. And that hasn't happened in every country. We see lenses like the 200 to 800 millimeter, this guy right here, for a shockingly low price of $18.99. And most of us were expecting it to be at least around $2,100, $2,200, or $2,300, with some even speculating that it could be around $2,700 or $2,800. And that's the power of the US dollar right now relative to other currencies. And that's why I would expect the top 10 from, let's say, B&H or Adorama or even Amazon to be very different from what we're seeing at Yodobashi. It doesn't invalidate what we're seeing, but what it does is it creates a very dynamic discussion for a Sunday morning. And you can see this already in the comment section down below. People talking about, this doesn't make any sense, or this is crazy, or I told you the embargo, the boycott, the lack of third-party lenses from third-party lens makers would be affecting Canon. But at the end of the day, when we look at Canon's sales results globally, we do see them dominating with around 48% market share. And yes, I understand that includes all digital camera sales, point and shoot, APS-C, DSLR, APS-C full frame, or sorry, APS-C mirrorless full frame, and APS-C, and you know, sadly what happened to the M mount. But we see everything, and 48% share doesn't lie. And while Sony might be dominating mirrorless in 2024, we haven't seen the numbers yet, it shows that Canon is doing very well and is very healthy. So while we see Canon completely shut out of the Japanese market, Canon is doing well. But I understand your frustration regarding third-party, or the lack of third-party lenses for the Canon RF mount. It is frustrating. Yeah, really frustrating. And hopefully things happen soon. The quotes coming out of Canon have been back and forth and really haven't told us anything. We don't have anything definitive. We don't have any sort of development announcement. And here we are in 2024. But there is one other possible reason we're seeing a lack of Canon in the top 10, the Yodobashi top 10, and that could be because two of the biggest cameras, well, at least one of the top selling cameras, the 5 series, is getting ready for a refresh. Rumors are, according to Canon Rumors, that the Canon EOS R5 Mark II will be refreshed. At least there'll be an announcement in late April or early May, which is just 2 months away. And the Canon EOS R1, the flagship mirrorless camera, that's supposed to be announced right alongside the Canon EOS R5 Mark II. So that could be holding off some sales, but here in North America at least, or I'd say mostly in the United States, where we see the Canon EOS R5 for $29.99 and you see the R5C for $35.99, I suspect these cameras are selling very, very well. And if you're interested in purchasing any of the cameras that I've talked about in this video, from the A7C II to the Nikon Z8, or even cameras that haven't showed up like the Canon EOS R6 Mark II, the R5, the R5C, or even the Hasselblad 907X. How about that? Hands up, applause for Hasselblad for showing up in the top 10. And a big thank you to everybody that has used my affiliate links in the past. I do get a small commission back, anywhere from 2 to 12%. And that really does help this channel grow. A big thanks to all of you that have used my affiliate links down below. These guys right here, I do have them in the description down below. It's what's allowed this channel in just 4 short years to be as big and as popular as it is. It's because I don't just talk about the gear that I talk about, I also purchase it, from the Canon EOS R5 with a 50mm f1.2 and the Ninja 5. That's what I'm shooting with right now, but I also shoot with the 100 to 500, the 200 to 800, the 100mm f2.8, and as you can see, a whole bunch of other lenses. I keep them here not just for decoration, but to show I shoot with these things. I don't just have them for show. I live with them every day, and that's the best way to cover this, is not just from somebody who's more of a tourist that goes to a place for a week or two, but somebody that lives, sleeps, and breathes with these lenses and these cameras. So a big thanks to everybody that has helped support this channel. And if you want to stay up to date on all the latest and greatest, then don't forget to follow me on X, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and choose all notifications. But have yourself a great week. We'll see you again soon. And I don't know about where you are, but spring has started here. It's cloudy and gray, but at least it's going up to 15 degrees Celsius, or what is that, around 65 degrees Fahrenheit? I can't wait to get outside. I should have this video out and published by 10, freeing up the rest of the day to explore the great outdoors. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you again soon.